Mr. Cumberbatch, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit of what we can expect to see and hear this evening.
Oh, thank you, Reverend. From my colleague Thomas Apt, who will be joining you folks at tonight's event, we'll talk a little bit more in depth about not only the Council on Criminal Justice, which I'll touch on very briefly, but also he'll talk in depth about the National Commission on COVID-19 and the criminal justice system, which is a task force that the Council on Criminal Justice convened in the midst of the global pandemic for the purposes of analyzing data, looking at research, and putting forth recommendations on how COVID-19 could be managed and ideally contained within the quote unquote criminal justice system, looking at 4 sectors specifically. So courts, corrections, community, and policing. And that task force formally ended late last year, but the recommendations are ones that we continue to put forth at events like this, at events like tonight. And that's what my colleague Thomas Apt will be talking about a little bit more this evening. So, Reverend, with the remaining time that I have, I think it's at least how I understand the schedule. Now is the time for me to just talk a little bit about what the commission has put forth in terms of its findings, and talk a little bit about the commission. Is that right?
Please, you could do that in a couple of minutes. That would be great.
All right, great. So the Council on Criminal Justice was launched in July of 2019. We're an invitational membership organization and a think tank whose goal is to serve as the center of gravity for policy and leadership in the criminal justice reform field. We also seek to advance understanding of criminal justice policy choices that are facing the nation and by extent facing states through nonpartisan research and consensus-based task forces/commissions. The Commission on COVID-19 and the Criminal Justice System was launched in July of 2020. It was led by former Attorney Generals Loretta Lynch and Alberto Gonzalez, along with a diverse set of leaders from policing, courts, corrections, community-based organizations, academia, and public health. The charge of the commission was 3 points. One is to assess the impact of COVID-19 in the criminal justice system. 2, to develop priority prevention strategies to minimize the impact of a resurgence or future pandemics. And 3, to establish a priority agenda for policy, practice, and research based on the commission's work. To date, there are 16 impact reports that cover various different topics. Before I end, I'll share the link to our website where you can look at not only the report, but you can learn more about the commissioners themselves. We also released interim recommendations, and on December 14th, we released final recommendations. I'll touch on just a few of the key recommendations and then delve into 1 or 2 of the final recommendations. So first, interim recommendation was to obviously stop the exponential growth by exceeding official guidance in order to contain the spread of COVID-19, and that guidance was largely given by the CDC. 2, adopt universal masking requirements for all staff and justice-involved populations when indoors and in close contact with others. 3, widely and frequently test staff and justice-involved populations for COVID-19 using the most reliable methods available. And 4, limit contact, maximize distance, and reduce density. That may sound like it's common sense, and particularly now in the midst of a global pandemic, but we were surprised to learn that that is all too often not happening within criminal justice populations. 5, to actively engage and consider impacted communities in all decision making. So that's not only families, but correction officers, police unions, so on and so forth. I'll share one final recommendation. I'll share one final finding and one final recommendation because I know we're short on time. And so the first finding, because as I mentioned, the Commission on COVID-19, its goal was to really look at the research and the data that existed before it can put forth recommendations. So finding number 1 is that criminal justice agencies were, and to some extent are still not, sufficiently prepared for a large-scale public crisis like the coronavirus pandemic. And the recommendation to follow that is as such: to engage all sectors of the system, public health authorities, and community-based organizations in integrated crises response plans, to prioritize those incarcerated and those working within the system for early access to vaccines and PPE, establish standing coordinated panels for public health emergency preparedness, and to build community-based capacity to support justice-involved populations during public health emergencies. Again, my colleague Thomas App will delve way more into all of the findings and the recommendations. But in short and in just to say, one is that we are talking about a system that was completely unprepared, not only for COVID-19, but it was completely unprepared to coordinate with other parts of the system and to come together with a cohesive plan. Two, the way in which public health lens has been used to make decisions about COVID-19 in states all across this country, unfortunately, we're not seeing that public health lens be applied to the incarcerated population and those working within the criminal justice system. So therefore, we're asking and we're recommending that public health lens and approach be used when we're talking about containing and controlling COVID-19 within not only prisons and jails, but also within courts and corrections and community and policing. So I know I'm out of time. I just wanted to say thank you to the organizers of this morning's presser, and look forward to joining you all tonight at 5 p.m. along with my colleague, Thomas App. And thank you specifically to Elder Leslie and her team for making sure that we had some time here today to talk about not only the Council on Criminal Justice, but also to talk briefly about the Commission on COVID-19. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And you covered a lot of bases in a very short period of time. I'm sure that there must be a number of people around the table here who have perhaps a question or two that has arisen that you've sparked curiosity with them. Is there anybody here who'd like to pose a question to Mr. Cumberbatch? That is among the media, of course.
And for what it's worth, I have given everyone the ability to unmute themselves. So if you'd like to open your microphone and ask a question, now's a good time.
Well, with the time being pressed, I'll press forward. The next person I'd like to introduce is Tony Gant. He's the regional coordinator for Nation Outside, which is a state organization run by formerly incarcerated men and women dedicated to criminal justice reform. As a young man, Mr. Gant was incarcerated within the Michigan Department of Corrections for 20 years, from 95 to 2015. Mr. Gant has organized successful campaigns around housing, employment for directly impacted people, along with working with currently incarcerated people around their experiences of COVID in prison. Mr. Gant's also a father, an author, and a business owner. Mr. Gant, if you'd like to fill us in on the perspective of what you'll be sharing this evening.
Yeah, thanks, Reverend Dale Milford. Most definitely thanks to Elder Leslie for inviting me into this space. When I think about the pandemic inside the Michigan prisons, I think about the fact that people in prisons and jails have largely been othered. And by othered, I mean looked at as other than human. Otherwise, there would be no way we would allow the type of infection rate and the type of deaths to occur. A lot of times when you hear from people and they're telling you what's going on inside the prisons, it's kind of shocking. And one story that I think that illustrates one of the key points, and the gentleman that just spoke, he talked about space and he talked about density. And one of the stories that a guy sent me, a friend of mine, his name is DJ, he was talking about how the phones work. And he talked about how they put X's on the floor for people to stand on to make sure that everybody is 6 feet apart. But then when you get to the phones themselves are only 2 feet apart. The irony is that the physical makeup of prison makes it impossible to socially distance. And the fact that they have not reduced the population makes the problem worse. That's it.
Well, that was very concise and pointed. Thank you, Tony. Now, our next speaker is Patrick Gallagher, who has been an organizer and a diligent investigator on behalf of Michigan United for over a couple of years now. And I know he has spoken to both legislators and people working within the criminal justice system and done pulled out a lot of information that he'll be sharing this evening. Patrick, can you give us a bit of a preview of what you'll be talking about this evening?
Reverend Dale, thank you very much. So I think that one day the story of COVID in Michigan jails and prisons, it'll be told as a cautionary tale of a failure of leadership, and which resulted in incalculable human suffering, and exactly how it should have been prevented. Today, fortunately, however, we're still in the middle of this story, and if the moral and political courage can be found, we're still able to write the final chapters of this without miring ourselves in tragedy. So I think of it like this. Imagine if the federal government came into town ahead of a hurricane, handed out some raincoats and umbrellas, and then immediately took off. We'd be petrified as the storm bore down, staring at the destruction in horror and demanding to know why so many vulnerable people were left to die. Well, this is exactly what happened in the Michigan Department of Corrections as the threat of the coronavirus emerged. Director Heidi Washington and her staff, they moved at a glacial pace to adapt to the changing facts on the ground and to live up to the MDOC's explicit mission statement to, quote, provide humane and protective custodial care. This is a dereliction of duty and is exemplified in their failure to produce a comprehensive pandemic plan until November, their failure to reduce the inmate population to prevent the spread of the virus, and their failure to answer any meaningful questions from the public and press along the way. As much as they'd like it, the lack of moral courage to do what they knew was right can't really be hidden from view. We are here to call it out and demand accountability for it. And most importantly, for the incarcerated people who lost their lives, who received death sentences for stealing a car or passing a bad check. This won't be enough. So for the families with loved ones on the inside, their world has been torn to pieces and the mental health crisis is only just beginning. For the brothers, the sisters, the mothers, and the fathers who can no longer see their loved ones, we need some big changes now and fast. We need a real push to decarcerate people who could have been released all along. We need to prioritize vaccines for incarcerated people, and we need to provide their families with support and assistance. The absolute least our leaders in government can do is ensure the safety of the people for whom they are entrusted to care. This is their duty. We're here to demand that they live up to it. Thank you, Reverend.
Well, thank you, Patrick. And I agree with you completely that it's so important for all of us to pay close attention to the issues at hand. Now, there's another issue that often gets overlooked. We look at the adult criminal justice system on a regular basis, but what gets overlooked many times are juveniles who are exposed to the juvenile justice system. And Ebony Hemphill is here with us today, and she'll be sharing with us today and this evening some special concerns, especially as they relate to juveniles. Ebony, if you can unmute.
Thank you, Reverend. I appreciate the warm welcome, and thank you, Elder Leslie, for inviting me to this space. Again, my name is Ebony Hemphill. I am the lead of Parents United with
for 14 months and still have not received any helpful correspondence. You vowed to take care of all Michiganders. Do you view prisoners as citizens of Michigan? And if so, why haven't you took time out your busy schedule to address this crisis. Sincerely yours, Keith Hudson, founder of Helping Those Left Behind. It's very troubling that not only have I written the governor and Heidi Washington, but I haven't even got no kind of correspondence back. I've also called their offices hundreds of times. I've had hundreds of people call and still haven't got any response. So I would just prayerfully ask the governor to please address this situation and this crisis, and please don't give us a good feel answer or give us a political kick the can down the road type of answer to this crisis. So please, I'm reaching out to you on the behalf of all the Michigan prisoners, men and women, to please step up and handle this situation to the best of your ability. You have the executive power to do anything you choose to do when it comes to lifers. We have our seniors, not only are they have been affected by this, but our prisoners, I know a guy by the name of Leon Douglas that's been in prison for 46 years. And for the crime he committed, he should not be there this long. And and I feel sorry, and I hate that the tragedy that happened to the person, but it just doesn't make sense for our seniors to be here in prison with cancer and have all these situations that's occurring with them health-wise and have to die for COVID-19. It's people that get a year and a day and go to prison, and they're facing a death sentence. So I asked her to please step up and be our governor for every citizen, male or female, and do the right thing and help us free some of these prisoners. Thank you, and I yield back my time.
Well, thank you so much for your passionate outpouring of communications. I'd also like to thank everyone who has contributed this morning, and especially thank the media who have come to hear what has to be said this evening and said strongly. Before we go, I'm going to post again in the chat the link to the event later today. It's the registration link at Mobilize. And I throw the floor open again to any of the media representatives who might have any questions for the wide array of speakers that we're talking to today. All you need to do is unmute if you have a question that's available to you. Well, I invite everyone definitely to register now for this evening. Spread the word. Open up your email accounts and your electronic Rolodex and send out the word and send out the link. Thank you all so much for your time. Really appreciate your concerns. God bless.